Good morning, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom McKenzie in London. These are the stories that set your agenda. Asian currencies hit a 2-decade low against the US dollar, with Japanese stocks falling on their first trading day of the year. China reaffirms its support for the yuan after a sudden drop in the currency late last week. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in Canada reported to be planning to resign as early as today, following months of pressure within his party. The loonie rises on the report. And Herbert Kickl is on track to become Austria's next Chancellor, paving the way for the country's first government led by the far-right Freedom Party. Happy Monday. First full week of trading then. European futures pointing to gains of 0.5%. It's a big week in terms of the data coming through in terms of PMI out of Europe and CPI inflation as well. Later this week, we keep an eye on Fed speak as well, given cautious commentary from some of the speakers over the last couple of days. FTSE 100 futures are currently flat. S&P futures stateside in similar territory. Nasdaq 100 futures pointing to modest gains of about 22 points, up 0.1%. Let's flip the board and look cross-asset because higher yields continues to be a theme. You have further issuance later today which will test the market. The 10-year currently yielding 4.61 at levels we have not seen since about May. Again, the cautious commentary from Fed speakers, including Mary Daly, on the continuing need to fight inflation. Euro-dollar at 103. Brent a little softer in the session, down 0.3%, $76 a barrel, and gold at 2,600, just down 0.2% on the yellow metal. Goldman Sachs, interestingly, pushing back their forecast for $3,000 per troy ounce until the middle of 2026. Let's cross over right now to Asia. Singapore, Avril Hong standing by for a check on the markets in that region. Avril, what is standing out to you?
Yeah, it's how it's been really fluctuating on the region's benchmark. That's what's standing out, Tom. And this is, I think, a risk-off day as the dominant themes for the year expected to still be about these tensions between the US and China, the greenback strength, uncomfortable for Asia equity. So Japan coming back, starting the trading year on the back foot despite the weakness in the Japanese currency. And we're seeing, though, helping to cap some of these declines in the region's benchmark, the chip stocks, as Microsoft talks about its plans for $80 billion in spending on the AI data centers. That's kind of reinvigorating the AI theme, and the TAIEX Kospi, those are the stock gauges that are outperforming. China continues to struggle after what's already been a really difficult start to 2025 for the board. It's also being expressed this concern about Chinese economic weakness on the Chinese currency. And if you look at what we're seeing today via the PBOC's fix, it is providing some support for the Chinese currency, so capped at around the 732 level. But if you look at how it has been faring, based on the renminbi basket, it has actually been the Chinese currency gaining against some of its major peers. So this suggests one of two things, that this is really a dollar story, but also to some that it won't be long now before the PBOC eventually has to start loosening its grip on the Chinese yuan via the fix. So that's what's standing out today. Tom.
Avril, thank you very much indeed. Avril Hong in Singapore with a check on the Asian markets. To a major political story now, because Canada's Globe and Mail says Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is expected to announce as early as this week that he will be resigning. Trudeau has been under pressure within his party, of course, over many months. For more, let's bring in Bloomberg's Katia Dimitrieva. Katia, what do we know about the reports? What do we know about this potential resignation for Trudeau, where it leaves his party, where it leaves his country, and the challenges that the Canadian leader has been facing?
Yeah, and there's a lot of challenges that he's been facing. This is kind of the culmination of the past month and a lot of the issues and a lot of the difficulties that him and the party have faced. So Globe and Mail reporting that he's going to be resigning or likely to resign at some point this week. And Reuters reporting as well afterwards that he's likely to resign by Wednesday. That's when his party, Liberal MPs, are expected to have a caucus meeting. So sometime before Wednesday, although I should note very clearly that he has not, as was reported in the Globe and Reuters, Trudeau has not yet decided definitively that he will step down. But certainly it's a surprise, despite all of this pushback that he's been getting in the past month, his sort of favorability ratings that have been so low. And the main issue that happened last month, which is Chrystia Freeland, his finance minister, stepping down with this letter that she wrote to the Canadian people. That was a complete surprise and really led a lot of this momentum, because after that, we had another 20 odd MPs coming forward, people from his own party saying that Trudeau should resign. He's not going to survive this political upheaval. And even more from his own party, even more people in private meetings saying that exact same thing. So the pressure is really building on something to happen here.
Katia, is Trudeau potentially an early international political victim of Donald Trump?
Yeah, well, if you look at the data, if you look at the favorability ratings, if you look at what's happened since Trump has well, he's not even inaugurated yet, but when he was elected, these promises of tariffs on both Mexico and Canada have really changed things and moved the needle, because now you have the situation where a lot of Canadian businesses and consumers are worried. They were already facing pressure with these sky-high housing prices, with inflation. That's been the story for much of the developed world. You know, a lot of consumers, resident citizens are pushing back against leadership because of how high inflation has been, how painful that's been. And with that only set to get even worse under Trump with tariffs, there's certainly been a lot of pushback. And you've seen confidence in Trudeau as well as his party to navigate this really faltering since that election.
OK, Bloomberg's Katia Dimitrieva, thank you very much indeed. Excellent in terms of the update there coming through for the politics of Canada and the potential resignation this week of the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Again, according to reports. Let's stay in North America right now, because President Joe Biden has urged Americans not to forget the January the 6th attack on the US Capitol 4 years ago. His comments were published in an op-ed by the Washington Post on Sunday. This, as US lawmakers will meet to formally certify Donald Trump's election as president today. Joining me now is Bloomberg's John Harney. And a reminder, of course, 4 years since we saw those dramatic pictures and images of Trump supporters storming the Capitol. What contrasts is Biden trying to draw, John, between this January the 6th and the January 6th of 4 years ago?
Well, he points out that this will be a routine event, a routine but essential event in democracy, the way it was intended to be. Kamala Harris, the vice president and as president of the Senate, will preside over a ceremony that will essentially confirm the victory of Donald Trump, her opponent. This, of course, is in a tradition of vice presidents, Al Gore with George W. Bush, and going back a ways, Richard Nixon with John F. Kennedy. But, of course, as routine as Biden would like to present this day, it's anything but, because of what happened 4 years ago on January 6, 2020. This certification is a national security event. The first time the certification has had that designation. The Secret Service will be in charge of it. There'll be 500 National Guard troops standing by. The Capitol Police will be on high alert. There will be a bit of tension, although, of course, the vote will go forward fairly seamlessly.
And that is the expectation. As you say, they've ramped up security around an event that was essentially a non-event until 4 years ago. Meanwhile, a bit of detail in terms of the specifics on the implementation of the Trump policy agenda. House Speaker Mike Johnson saying that he plans to pass a bill that would encompass much of Trump's agenda by spring, which sounds like a pretty swift implementation process. How likely is that? And what is the uniformity in terms of opinion between the House and the Senate in terms of getting that chunky bill across the line in that kind of time frame?
Well, we'll see. Don't forget, Mike Johnson himself was reelected as Speaker by a very narrow margin just on Friday, with a bit of drama, I should say. His control, the Republican control of Congress, is even narrower than it was in the last Congress. But Donald Trump echoed Johnson's ambition, saying that he would like a giant package that would encompass the border, taxes, and perhaps and including new tax relief for overtime, maybe for Social Security recipients. But it's a tall order, and given the fractious nature of the Republicans in Congress, who are all very conservative but have very different opinions about how to achieve their goals, and then the Senate, which is now in Republican hands, but is a very different animal than the House. So it's possible, certainly, but it's a very ambitious goal for Mike Johnson.
Okay, Bloomberg's John Harney, thank you very much indeed on the latest when it comes to what is unpassing and unfolding, of course, in the capital, Washington, D.C., as we look to the days ahead and that confirmation, of course, on January the 20th, inauguration, of course, for incoming President Donald Trump. Now, some Fed officials to the macro now are continuing to stress that the inflation fight has not yet been won. Adriana Kugler spoke over the weekend during a panel discussion.
Obviously, our job is not done. We're not at 2% yet. So we're definitely aiming still to get there. And we know the job is not done.
OK, let's get more with Bloomberg's Valerie Teitel. Valerie, we had the jobs data on Friday, of course, as well. What is the uniformity around the message now from Fed officials? To what extent have they coalesced around the idea that there needs to be more time to bring inflation back to target?
Well, Tom, there has been a regime shift in Fed speak lately. Before they were worried about the weakness of the jobs market. Now they seem to be more focused on the upside risk to inflation. We heard from Adriana Kugler this weekend. She also went on to say that they need to ensure the recent bump in inflation isn't persistent. Mary Daly, we also heard from this weekend, saying that inflation is uncomfortably above our target. And Thomas Barkin, he spoke on Friday, Tom, saying that there's more upside risk than downside risk to inflation. Now, what maybe behind these words, Tom, is the fact that Trump's political economic agenda might boost growth, and with that might cause some more upside risk to inflation. We had the ISM manufacturing on Friday. It came in strong, which boosted Treasury yields. If we flip on, we can also see that in the Asia session overnight, these yields continued to creep higher. That U.S. 10-year yield at 462, that is 8 basis points shy of the 2024 high of 470. But if you focus in on the 30-year yield, which is driven more by growth expectations, by inflation expectations, that is also very much hitting those 2024 highs. It's now at 483. If we flip on and just see how that has fared versus last April, it is through those highs of last April. It is off the highs that we did see back in 2023, but 483 on that 30-year yield does show that the Treasury market is trying to price in the upside risk to growth and hence the upside risk to inflation that are within Trump's policies. Finally, what we have, looking forward through this week. On Tuesday, we get the ISM services and the JOLTS data. Wednesday is the Fed minutes. And after that, on Thursday, remember, the U.S. market will be closed for the Jimmy Carter funeral. Then on Friday is the big one, Tom. It's non-farm payrolls showing what's the next step ahead for the U.S. jobs market.
Yeah, data to build out a picture on the labour market for the U.S. by the end of the week. Bloomberg's Valerie Teitel with a breakdown of what we've been hearing from Fed speakers and what to look out for and keep across this week when it comes to the data out of the US. Valerie, thank you very much indeed, our markets reporter, of course. Here's what else to be thinking about for the weekend above and beyond the US. Euro area inflation comes through, of course, on Tuesday. We will break that for you. Markets expecting about 100 basis points of cuts for the ECB by the end of this year. On Thursday, a very different inflation dynamic when it comes to prices out of China, with policymakers wanting to see an increase in inflation where pricing has been challenged. And on Friday, it is the US non-farm payrolls, with the print expected at around 160,000 for the month of December. Unemployment seen at around 4.2%. Coming up, Austria's far-right leader gets a chance to form a government. It's the latest on the developing situation in Vienna. Coming up next, we'll bring you the details. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Now, Austria's anti-immigrant Freedom Party is creeping closer to appointing its first Chancellor after receiving an invitation by the nation's president to discuss forming a government. The development comes after efforts to form a centrist coalition collapsed and the Conservative Chancellor, Karl Nehammer, resigned. Let's get more with Bloomberg's Oliver Crook, who joins us with the details. What is the latest then, Ollie, in terms of the politics on the ground in Vienna? How did we get to what could be a pretty historic moment for Austria?
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. I mean, listen, remember, this is an election that took place back in September, and basically the winning party was Herbert Kickl, this Freedom Party, the far-right party here in Austria. They won the greatest number of votes, but they were effectively sort of firewalled out of politics because they were basically boycotted by the rest of the political establishment in Austria. So you had Karl Nehammer, who basically was the incumbent, who stayed on and to have power in power as Chancellor, and basically began these negotiations that have been going on since September, Tom, between the center-right, the center-left, and the Liberals. The Liberals, then, the smallest party there, basically pulled the plug on those negotiations over the weekend. That led to the resignation of the Chancellor. He also stepped down as the head of the party, and that created basically two possible outcomes for Austria. One in which they basically call new elections, fresh political sort of turmoil, and the second is that actually maybe now the far right is given a mandate. And so we will have the head of the Freedom Party meet with the president of Austria at 11 a.m. Today. That seems potentially now like the most likely outcome. But Tom, does this sound at all familiar to you, where basically you have a very ascendant far right across a country that is basically creating a huge problem for the political establishment that refuses to work with them, but increasingly basically cannot ignore that the influence that they're having, and adding to it, Tom, very weak economic growth, dealing with very sort of major budgetary issues. This is exactly what is going on in France. This is exactly what is going on in Germany. And there are echoes of this also in the Netherlands. This is basically the same exact play loop, the same exact movie playing out across Europe at a time, Tom, when Europe needs to really get its act together, work more collectively. And particularly, these things are happening in Vienna, Paris, Berlin. But right here in Brussels is where they're going to have the effect, particularly when you have this commission trying to bring out these very ambitious plans of European competitiveness, trying to face off China and, of course, the new Trump presidency.
Yeah, and Ollie, look, as you nod to, the political firewall that has so far kept these far-right parties out of power, and you're seeing attempts to maintain that with the AfD in Germany and the National Rally in France, that firewall appears to be crumbling in Austria. Talk to us as well about the catalytic effect of Musk's support for some of these European far-right movements.
Yeah, Tom, this seems to be like the other thing that is sort of unifying a lot of these sort of political stories in Europe is Elon Musk's more and more sort of ubiquitous involvement in European politics, starting, really with the United Kingdom, but also now in Germany, the AfD. This is basically the major political story right now for the German election. Elon Musk coming out and backing the AfD, the far-right party. He is going to do a sort of Twitter space, or I should say an X space, with Alice Weidel, the head of the AfD, over on Thursday, and really sort of weighing in. He's called Olaf Scholz an incompetent fool. He's called the president of Germany a tyrant. And we've heard from a number of politicians from the mainstream, all basically horrified by this. I mean, we heard recently from Scholz saying that, Germany is governed by the will of its citizens and not by the erratic statements of a billionaire from the USA. But these statements are gaining, a lot of sort of attention internationally. What I think is really interesting is we reached out to the AfD about this. We asked them about this, and we heard from their spokesman saying, in the view of Musk's outstanding role in the coming Trump administration, we also believe that it is important for the German-American relations if the AfD, as a significant political force, can build diplomatic bridges. So we heard it directly from the AfD there. They really see this not only as a sort of way to gain support from, and credibility from a very sort of esteemed businessman in the world, but a way directly to build a relationship with the Trump administration. There is, of course, Tom, something of a sort of rich irony in all of this, because part of the AfD's platform is a huge skepticism and a sort of really dislike of American influence in European politics, American influence in Germany. Obviously, they feel a little bit different about it when it comes in their favor. But they're also sort of one of their chapter in Brandenburg against the sort of Tesla factories. So there's a lot of also sort of contradictions within all of this. But again, I think it's really significant putting it in the context of this new Trump administration and also the sort of charm offensive we've seen from all these different leaders. I mean, Meloni was just in Mar-a-Lago over the weekend to meet with Donald Trump there in Florida. Everybody is trying to sort of find their path to this new president who will be inaugurated in just a few days.
OK, Bloomberg's Ollie Crook, thank you very much indeed on the impact and the influence that Musk is already having on some parts of the body politic of Europe as well. Ollie, thank you. Now, we are going to be speaking exclusively, by the way, to Stéphane Séjourné, the EU's Commissioner for Prosperity and Industrial Strategy on Europe's political and economic headwinds. So stay tuned for that conversation as well. And this is a story that Ollie nodded to. Italy is in advanced talks with SpaceX for a 5-year contract to provide secure telecommunications for the government. Sources say the $1.6 billion deal is aimed at supplying Italy with top-level encryption for telephone and internet services. But the plan is opposed by some Italian officials concerned about the impact on local carriers. And Russia's defense ministry says its forces have repelled what appears to be a fresh Ukrainian offensive in the border region of Kursk. Ukraine earlier seized territory in the region during a surprise incursion that started in mid-August. Russia has claimed back about half that territory, and US officials say it could regain the rest in a matter of months. Coming up, New York City finally joins London and Stockholm with a congestion pricing scheme. We're going to look at what drivers will pay and their reception to it. That's next. This is Bloomberg. New York City has joined Stockholm and London in charging drivers to enter high traffic areas, with the city's controversial congestion pricing programme starting yesterday. Bloomberg's Shakil Amari explains.
For drivers in Manhattan, transportation is about to get pricier. Motorists entering the congestion relief zone south of 60th Street will need to pay a toll. During peak hours for small vehicles and vans, $9 per day, down from an earlier plan of $15. For trucks and buses, between $14.40 and $21.60. Riding a motorcycle, $4.50. State leaders say the money will fill the MTA's $15 billion budget gap, paying for subway improvements and new electric buses. The plan will also help get at least 80,000 cars off city streets. In June, New York Governor Kathy Hochul delayed the measure weeks before it took effect.
I have come to the difficult decision that implementing the planned congestion pricing system risks too many unintended consequences for New Yorkers at this time.
5 months later, Hochul revived the idea. Still, lawsuits from opponents, including New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy, poured in.
We're not against lowering pollution. We're for that. But there's a time, there's a place, there's a deal that works for New Jersey commuters and ones that don't.
The $9 daily toll will rise to $12 in 2028 and $15 in 2031. In New York, Shakil Omari, Bloomberg News.
Coming up, Elon Musk appears to have turned on UK politician Nigel Farage. More on the world's richest man and his heated interventions in European politics. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Good morning, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom Mackenzie in London. These are the stories that set your agenda. Asian currencies hit a 2-decade low versus the US dollar, with Japanese stocks falling on their first trading day of the year. China reaffirming its support for the yuan after a sudden drop in the currency late last week. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is reported to be planning to resign as early as today, following months of pressure within his party. The loonie rises on the report. And Herbert Kickl is on track to become Austria's next Chancellor, paving the way for the country's first government led by the far-right Freedom Party. Let's Check in on these markets then on a day of and a week of big data releases across the Eurozone and non-farm payrolls out of the US on Friday. We're listening out as well for Fed speak throughout Monday and Tuesday to give us a sense as to how much caution is within the FOMC now in terms of further and future rate cuts. Currently, European markets pointing to gains of 0.6%, so set for a fairly positive start for the first full week of trading. FTSE 100 futures, though, are flat. S&P futures stateside pointing to modest gains of 0.1% after a decent session on Friday. Nasdaq 100 futures looking to add 27 points. Let's check in on the Treasury and US yield story, because yields across US Treasuries are about the highest level they've seen since around May. You're currently at 461, close to 462 on the US benchmark 10-year, with yields up again 2 basis points. Euro dollar at 103. We look ahead to PMI data out of the Eurozone, 9 a.m. UK time. We'll break that for you. Brent trading lower at 0.4% down in the session at 76.22. And gold also a little softer, down 0.3%. Goldman Sachs have revised and pushed back their forecast for $3,000 gold until the middle of 2026, currently at 2,631 on gold. Now, Elon Musk appears to have turned on Reform UK Party leader Nigel Farage, a friend, of course, of Donald Trump, who he previously supported. The billionaire posted on X, quote, "The Reform Party needs a new leader. Farage doesn't have what it takes." Bloomberg's Lizzie Burden joins me now. Why the sudden and pretty dramatic pivot then on Nigel Farage from Elon Musk, and do we care?
I mean, far be it from me to try and read the mind of Elon Musk, Tom, but this, as you say, really is a U-turn, and it shows that Musk's becoming a headache not just to Keir Starmer but to the right wing of British politics as well. It was only days ago that Farage's Reform UK was apparently the party that could be the only one to save Britain. And Musk and Farage recently went to Mar-a-Lago. You can see there, and you can see as well, Farage had been touting this big donation by Musk to his party. But now the question is whether Musk is going to back Tommy Robinson, this far-right activist, to be the Reform UK leader. You've had Musk talking about how Tommy Robinson should be released from prison. He's in for contempt of court. Farage has distanced himself from Tommy Robinson, and we've reported that several senior politicians in the UK have been in touch with their links on the Republican right, warning them against endorsing Robinson, because they say, look, Robinson's particular hue of anti-immigrant politics just isn't supported by the mainstream right in Britain. But it's a big question, because at the moment Musk has only suggested the Reform MP Rupert Lowe should succeed Farage. So it's one we'll definitely be watching this week on X.
One of the animating factors for Musk seems to be this child abuse scandal and how it's been handled at the local level, but also now by the Labour leadership and a target on the back of Keir Starmer. That's where Musk has put it, at least politically speaking, of course. This seems to be an animating factor for Musk. What has the UK government been saying about that particular scandal, how they're handling it? Have they been on the defensive?
Well, the reason why this historic scandal has come back to the forefront of British politics is because Labour has rejected calls for a public inquiry into it. Musk has said that Starmer's complicit in the rape of Britain. But Starmer, of course, was head of the Crown Prosecution Service that began the prosecution of these grooming gangs in British towns. Starmer doesn't want to get dragged into some sort of soap opera battle with Elon Musk. So far, he's been brushing off Musk's attacks. When Musk said that civil war was inevitable during the summer riots, Starmer's been trying to rise above it, as he would see it. But it does raise the question of how the special relationship, quote unquote, between the US and the UK is going to play out under Trump and Starmer, which is an interesting question for the new UK ambassador to Washington, Lord Mandelson, Peter Mandelson, of course, a key Blairite in his day. He'd suggested previously that Farage should be some sort of bridge between Trump and Labour. But then you could ask whether it's any surprise that Musk is attacking Starmer when, previously you had the Foreign Secretary David Lammy, the Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner criticising Donald Trump. You've got Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, and the Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey jetting off to Beijing this week to go and try and woo China. Is it that Trump's attack dog is merely doing what you would expect him to do at this point?
Well, of course, Musk has his own skin in the game when it comes to the Chinese market and has done pretty well at wooing the Chinese himself. Talk to us about what's happening on the domestic front in the UK. It's not all about Musk. There's also some domestic policy as well and a focus on the healthcare system here.
Indeed. And Keir Starmer is going to be giving a speechette, whatever that means, on the National Health Service today. Clearly, first of all, trying to keep it brief when we've had such confusion over his missions and milestones and first steps and foundations in 2024, trying to clarify the messaging and, importantly, trying to focus on the domestic agenda when he's been accused of being absent as Prime Minister so far. We've actually crunched the numbers and looked how much he travelled last year. And actually, he, in his first 6 months of office, has been abroad more than any of his immediate successors. And you have to kind of wonder what the point of it was when he went to COP in Azerbaijan, there were hardly any other high-profile leaders there. Many of the leaders that he has met on the circuit have, shall we say, waning influence. Justin Trudeau in the news today, Joe Biden on his way out. So instead, as I say, you've got the Chancellor visiting China this week. And importantly, interestingly, we haven't yet had a decision on who's going to represent the UK at Trump's inauguration. OK, and we'll monitor, of course, that China visit as well by the Chancellor and other members of the team here in the UK. Lizzie Burden, our UK correspondent, thank you very much indeed. Now, some other stories making the news this Monday. The UK City Minister is coming under growing scrutiny after reports she was given a central London property by a developer associated with Bangladesh's former government. The FT reports that Tulip Siddique received an apartment in 2004 without making a payment for it. A spokesperson for the minister said any suggestion her ownership of this property is in any way linked to support for the Awami League could be categorically wrong, would be categorically wrong. And UK business confidence has dropped to its lowest level since former Prime Minister Liz Truss's disastrous mini-budget more than 2 years ago. According to a survey by the British Chambers of Commerce, a majority of firms expect prices to increase over the next 3 months as they pass on higher taxes and another jump in the minimum wage. The lobby says business conditions are weak and more firms have slowed investment than accelerated it over the past 3 months. Back to the US now, where President Joe Biden is set to ban new offshore oil and gas development across some 625 million acres of US coastal territory. The move is designed to permanently protect coastal waters and the communities that depend on them from fossil fuel development and the risk of oil spills. Bloomberg understands that Biden is keeping the door open for new oil and natural gas leasing in the central and western portions of the Gulf of Mexico. Shares in Nippon Steel are falling. That's after President Joe Biden blocked the Japanese company's planned $14.1 billion takeover of US steel, citing a threat to national security. For more, let's bring in opening trade anchor Kriti Gupta. Kriti, not unexpected, the decision from President Biden. Why the significance? What's next?
Well, this used to be the world's first billion-dollar company. This is the steel company that kind of helped create America's skyscrapers and bridges and really helped with the war effort in Europe way back in the day. This is considered a company that is one too big to fail and basically a key piece of the American kind of framework. That being said, it's a company that hasn't actually dominated the steel space in quite some time, in decades, the way that did in, say, the first half of the 19th century. It really comes down to this idea of production capacity. You're seeing it on your screen right now, this idea that China dominates the steel production. The U.S. isn't even second or third. It's actually fourth. And even within that, U.S. Steel specifically has not been the dominant player in some time. It really comes up to production capacity, and that's where the concern lies. Take a listen to what one of the major steel union presidents had to say.
The amount of steel that we're capable of making in this country today, we made 30 years ago. There's been a lot of technology changes. There is a lot of changes in the way we do the work, but there's also lots of changes in their equipment and in the materials and how we make steel. So we're very capable of making the steel that we need in this country. Actually, the demand is higher than our capacity.
David McCall there, the major steel union president, and he's saying, look, they have the production capacity, but they're not actually able to get there. And that's really where the concern lies here, because one of the major kind of veto positions or concessions that Nippon Steel had offered President Biden was a veto on production capacity given the national security. He didn't say anything about employment or the output itself. And that's some of the national security concerns around Nippon Steel.
So what is ultimately at stake then? This is a company that does not have the investment now coming through from a potential Japanese partner.
And that's why they wanted this deal so badly, because if you'll remember back in 2017, Cleveland-Cliffs, which was another major U.S. steel producer, offered to take over the company for $10 billion, so a lower value. But the concern at the time there was from the board that simply there wouldn't be enough kind of meat there basically on the bones to appease some of the antitrust regulators, because that union would have brought 95% of iron ore production under one company in the United States. So again, kind of bringing back the regulatory concern. But this time around, there's global repercussions. And in the fallout of this decision from Joe Biden, which, by the way, CFIUS, the National Security Review, couldn't come to a consensus, even Biden's inner circle, his cabinet, some of the names on your screen really showed some concerns. Janet Yellen, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, voicing her concerns, according to reports, simply that Japan is the U.S.'s #1 foreign direct investor. Does this affect that relationship? You're already seeing comments around Prime Minister Ishiba of Japan along the similar lines. Rahm Emanuel, the ambassador to Japan, saying this could hurt some of the alliances around the approach to China, approach to the South China Sea situation. And again, you're already seeing that. The other side of the equation is the likes of Jennifer Granholm or Catherine Tai, who's actually supported the decision and saying this is how you keep energy security and commodity security under the arm of the United States.
OK, so from one of the foundations in terms of building out the infrastructure of the US economy to a software layer designed and built in China. And we're talking about TikTok and their appeal of a potential ban. This is a very real risk that TikTok could actually be banned in some form in the next few weeks. They're going to appeal it later this week. There's a linkage, you say, between these two stories. What is it?
Two completely different companies. You wouldn't think there is a linkage, but the fact that they're both being reviewed for national security reasons, this is the heart of the concerns from the Japanese. But for China, there's a very clear narrative. There's the trade story. It's a carrot of the stick story. It's American data in the hands of arguably America's biggest competitor. Can you check all those boxes for Japan? So why is Japan meeting those same kind of allegations or those same kind of check marks that perhaps the United States is against China? That's the concern anyway. But this week especially, you're going to hear that from TikTok. The hearing set for January 10th there. So this national security conversation under Biden, largely under Trump, is going to continue.
Kriti Gupta, thank you very much indeed. Opening trade anchor, of course, with her show coming up in the next 15 minutes or so. Coming up, Hon Hai shares, we just showed them there, a little preview. Gain after revenue growth beats expectations on strong AI demand. The trade is still there. And Foxconn or Hon Hai is a litmus test, of course. We get more on the outlook for the world's largest maker of iPhones, but increasingly the technology and data center networking components as well. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back. Shares in Hon Hai, also known as Foxconn, are gaining, as you can see, this morning. That's after the iPhone maker reported better than expected results on stronger demand for AI. Let's bring in our Asia technology reporter, Jane Lanhee Lee, then, for the details out of Taipei. Break down the numbers for us then, Jane. This seems to be bolstering expectations around Foxconn's ability to profit from AI.
Right. Well, I mean, as you know, Hon Hai is a major assembler for NVIDIA AI servers. It's actually the biggest one in the world. So it's been closely watched to see, the future of AI infrastructure build out. I was really surprised, and I guess so was the market, that they had such great sales in December because, again, this is not a quarterly earnings report, but a monthly sales report. And brought together, we get the picture of the fourth quarter, which the sales was up 15%, exceeding analysts' expectations of 13%. And that's thanks to a December 40% monthly sales growth year on year. And so that's quite spectacular. And Hon Hai is also saying that the outlook for the first quarter will be significant growth again year on year. So that's giving
40%,
some breathing room for investors who are worried. Yeah, that's a lot, right? It was single-digit growth for November and October, and so it was quite a surprise. I thought they would miss that outlook.
So, Jane, what do you read into that? I mean, can you take that number and extrapolate into and through 2025? I mean, how sustainable is this demand going to be? I mean, that's a key question, isn't it?
Well, month on month, this kind of 40% growth, I think it's going to be difficult. Also, in the first quarter, while their outlook year on year is significant growth, they are saying that they will have a sequential down because, the first quarter is generally a more quiet period with Chinese New Year's kicking in and whatnot. And so, according to that, some analysts like Citi has calculated that they would be missing market estimates. So the Citi analyst has said that could bring some softness into the shares going forward in the near term. But the company has said and repeated as recently as late November, that it expects AI service sales to remain strong this year, and even the division that houses the AI servers could match the sales of the division that houses the iPhone sales. So it's good news for Hon Hai to be able to diversify away from just being an Apple contract manufacturer.
Yeah. So on Apple then, Jane, I mean, to what extent is this becoming a two-speed company, or is that too simplistic? What is the outlook for the iPhone part of the business?
Well, for iPhone sales, as that decreases from Hon Hai, from its overall sales, it takes some of the risk away, but it is still a major part of their revenue. And so that will continue to be a focus for investors. iPhone sales, as we've read from the likes of IDC, have been muted, and whether that changes in 2025 is the big question, and that will still have an impact on Hon Hai's bottom line.
OK, Asia Tech reporter Jane Lanhee Lee with a breakdown there of the numbers coming through for Hon Hai Foxconn. Thank you very much indeed. And what it tells us as well about demand for AI, particularly given their client, NVIDIA, when it comes to those AI accelerator servers. Now, Microsoft plans, staying on that space, plans to spend $80 billion this year, $80 billion this year, building those data centers, with over half of the projected spending to be in the US. Cloud infrastructure providers such as Amazon and Microsoft have been racing to expand computing capacity by constructing new data centers. Microsoft spent over $50 billion on CapEx in the last fiscal year. Shares of Getty Images rose sharply on Friday after Bloomberg reported that it's exploring a combination with rival Shutterstock. Sources say Getty has been weighing how to structure a deal that would bring together two of the biggest providers of licensed visual content in the US. The merger deliberations come as AI upends the content creation business. There is plenty more coming up. We're going to do a breakdown of what to expect in terms of the data fronts and play out some of the sound from Mary Daly of the Fed on her views around policy settings and the fight against inflation. That's coming up. This is Bloomberg.
I would not want to see further slowing in the labor market. So while we do absolutely have to continue to get inflation down to our 2% target, we have to be resolute about that. We have to do it in a thoughtful manner so that we can also support the full employment.
San Francisco Fed President Mary Daly, just another voice from the FOMC, seemingly cementing the idea, the need for caution around the Fed's attempts to get back to that 2% target, with 3-month annualized inflation back above 3%. That caution is there. We're going to hear from more Fed speakers. Lisa Cook today. We're going to hear from Chris Waller on Wednesday, Barkin on Tuesday as well. So to what extent you get uniformity or not? Maybe there's a little bit of discussion around the balance of risks between those two competing targets on, of course, unemployment and inflation. But the hawkish commentary from Fed officials has been there. Markets pricing in fewer than 2 interest rate cuts by this year, just 38 basis points, with the first cut the next first cut of 2025 not fully priced until June by these markets. Again, 38 basis points by the end of the year. To what extent is that moderated and changed on the data front, as well as what we hear from Fed officials? Talking of the data front, let's flip the board and have a look at the preview around non-farm payrolls, because this is the data point that could potentially adjust those views as well. Expectations that you've got to print, again, pretty solid, around 160,000 for the month of December. You're expecting to see unemployment staying at about 4.2%. For Bloomberg Economics, it will be a reminder of US exceptionalism and therefore just underscore the views that we've been hearing articulated from those Fed officials. But again, we'll see what the number and how that transpires. If you do get significant softness and maybe the unemployment rate ticking up, that potentially could be a key for an adjustment in terms of these views. Let's flip the board and have a look in terms of the inflation expectations and the prints out of the Eurozone. We have PMI today, we have inflation early this week in terms of the Eurozone. Markets still pricing in about 98 basis points, almost fully 100 basis points and all. Full 1% in terms of cuts coming through from the ECB. You could see a bit of a tick up. That's largely, Bloomberg Economics says, down to base effects around fuel. Longer term through this year, Bloomberg Economics sees that disinflation trend continuing and space still for the ECB to continue to cut. On Tuesday, we're going to speak exclusively, by the way, with Stéphane Séjourné, the EU's Commissioner for Prosperity and Industrial Strategy, on Europe's political and economic headwinds. But up next, it's the opening trade. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg.